Hi everybody, thanks for joining me today. We want to talk a little bit more about the subject of cholesterol that a lot of people are worried about. I do find it interesting the fact that the human body has evolved over many years and relies very much on cholesterol. It's one of the most fundamental and important nutrients in the human body. And yet, whenever you mention the word cholesterol to most people, their brain automatically relates it to the word heart disease, which I think is quite, on one hand it's almost humorous, on the other hand it's very sad, because how we've convinced the population that something so essential to their well-being is seen quite negatively is just beyond my belief. But anyway, there's a few other points I wanted to bring out today. The first one is cholesterol tests. I've always amused over the years that people will come in and sort of say, oh, my cholesterol, I've been eating this and eating that, my cholesterol has dropped by 10% since my last test. Or I've been doing something else like eating all the right foods and it's actually gone up. The first thing I've got to tell you is that cholesterol tests are actually not that accurate. And the reason for that is because pure cholesterol in its purest form isn't actually in the bloodstream. It's sitting inside of a lipoprotein, which is, imagine it's a bit like a big balloon of material. And somehow we need to isolate out the different types of cholesterol. And it's not easy to do. And so you get some variation. And so typically, for example, it's not uncommon, where you could, particularly between laboratories as well, because some of the equipment calibrations are different. But you could go for a test in one place today, one laboratory or pathology, and get a reading of, say, 5, which is probably around about 200 on the American scale, and go to another pathology laboratory and find that it's not 5, but it's 6.5, and that it's not 200, but it's around about 260. The second thing I want to talk about is the question of family risk. We often hear, a doctor will say, oh, is there any history of heart disease in your family? And once again, I think whenever people hear that, they sort of react, say, oh yes, my uncle died of a heart attack, and my dad's got supposedly high cholesterol. And so in their minds, they think that suddenly they're greatly at risk of heart disease because it's in the family. But if you step back from it, the reality is that, nearly half the people die of a heart attack. So to ask the question, is there any, and by the way, so, close to 50% of the population historically have had some form of heart disease. They've either died from it or they've had some early signs of it. Therefore, to ask the question, is there any in your family, is heart disease, does anyone have it? Is kind of an absurd question, because if 50% of the population is dying of heart disease at some point in time in their life, well, you'd have to assume that 50% in everyone's family, if you use the law of averages, had heart disease. And therefore, to ask the question, is there anyone in your family that suffers from heart disease? Or, well, of course, the answer is yes. So I find it kind of an absurd, stupid question in the case of heart disease. It's nonsensical, because the answer is yes. It's a bit like asking the question, do people in your family have lunch? Well, I think at least half of them would. I mean, anyway, I won't belabor that particular point. I wanted to talk to you about the question of CT scanning. On one hand, I'm not in favor of doing it too often, because CT scanning, where you go inside of a machine where it takes a number of pictures to look at any calcium buildup in the arteries, I think it's justified for someone who's worried about their cholesterol, as a way of putting them at ease that they don't have a problem. I think it's wrong that if someone has a slightly elevated cholesterol, that we immediately read for the prescription pad and give them a drug to lower it. The reality is a person could be, say, 40 years of age or 50 years of age and have very clean arteries because their body is very, very healthy, no cholesterol problems anywhere, no buildup in the arteries, and therefore to prescribe medications to those people is insane. And so logically, in that case, I think it would be fair to say getting a CT scan done to see what the arteries look like makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure you'd want to do it more than once every 5 or 6 or 7 years, because you do get subjected to radiation. But certainly, I think the levels are deemed as somewhat low. I think doing that would be a better option than taking medication, because if your arteries are squeaky clean, then at least you can feel safe in your heart of knowing that you haven't got a problem. There is a book I came across some time ago called Track Your Plaque, written by William Davis. And I think it's a very good book that talks about the CT scanning. The only thing I would caution you on is there's a lot of old equipment in pathologies and testing laboratories used. I'm a great believer, because every time a CT scan is put out, and people like GE and Siemens and others make this sort of equipment, they get it better and better. And so if the place you go has some old bit of equipment, I'd probably avoid that and go to some hospital where they've got the latest equipment, because the amount of radiation used is considerably lower with the more recent equipment, and I think that's important. So, okay, just a little bit more information for you in terms of this whole cholesterol subject. So I'll see you next time.